Okay, so here's the fourth part of the lecture on the second estate. And as I say, the second estate are those who fight. And especially, they're supposed to go on crusade. They're supposed to liberate the Holy Land from the Muslims. They're supposed to engage in little counter-jihad. So this is holy war. All right, this is why it's embarrassing, right? Christians aren't really supposed to do that. War, if they must engage in war, it's a necessary evil. But now the church is praising it as an absolute good. I always like talking about something that comes out of the Crusades, and that is their crusading orders. All right, so you're a knight, and your job is to practice arms and get good at it. But it's such a holy calling that some knights organize themselves into orders that are kind of parallel to monks. But instead of taking, they took vows of poverty and chastity and obedience, but instead of praying 8 times a day, they would practice their arms. And there's a number of such orders that came to exist. Number one are the Hospitallers, okay, or technically they are known as the Knights of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem. Hospital had a wider meaning in the Middle Ages. It wasn't just a place where you went when you were sick. It was also also had a sense of hostel, where you could go and stay if you were on pilgrimage. And so that's what the Hospitallers did. They would ferry pilgrims to Jerusalem. They would protect them on the way, and they would maintain a hospital for them to stay in Jerusalem. They still exist, actually. They were expelled from the Holy Land when the Crusaders lost Acre in 1291. From there, they went to the Greek island of Rhodes, which was their home base until 1522, when Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottoman emperor, took it. So from there, they went to the island of Malta, which is a little island in the Mediterranean, sort of halfway between Italy and Tunisia. Okay, and it's its own country. It's part of the EU. You can visit it now if you want. And that was their base. And they were, I think they were hoping someday to be able to take Jerusalem back, but in the meantime, they kind of, they would prey on Muslim shipping. They would protect Europe from Muslims who might go on slave raids, that sort of thing. But they were too much a reminder of the medieval times, and so when Napoleon came through in 1798, he basically kicked them out of Malta, and they haven't had a country since. They still exist as a charitable organization, though. And if you are Catholic and you are aristocratic and you know the right people, maybe you can join the so-called Knights of Malta. There's a medieval drawing it's a drawing of medieval knights wearing their surcoats with that distinctive cross on it. And obviously nowadays, if you're in the Knights of Malta, you're not practicing horsemanship or swordsmanship all the time, but you do get that nifty surcoat to wear with that distinctive 8-pointed cross known as a Maltese cross after the island of Malta. So as I say, it still exists as an organization. There's another group that I think you might find even more interesting, and that is the Order of the Poor Knights of the Temple of Solomon, also known as the Templars. They were founded in 1119, and they, again, they would ferry pilgrims to the Holy Land. They were particularly interested in the Temple Mount. They conducted Well, archaeological excavations on the Temple Mount. The really interesting thing about the Templars, though, is that they got involved in finance. There are opportunities now in Europe. There's money to be made. So there are Templars in the Holy Land, but there were Templar chapters throughout Europe, and there's a Templar church in London. You can go and see it. So there's a local chapter of the Templars, and they would raise money to send to the Holy Land. You could do that, or you could invest it, make a lot of money. And that's what the Templars became. They became this kind of multinational banking organization. And you can see there their seal. Their formal name is the Poor Knights. Okay? They're so poor, they can only afford one horse for 2 knights. And so their seal has 2 knights riding one horse because they're so poor. But that's completely rhetorical. By the end of it, they were very wealthy. An individual knight could afford, a lot of horses, in fact. So that's the interesting thing about the Templars. And people are sort of shocked about what happened to them. Okay? There are opportunities to make money in the Middle Ages. But they don't have the sense of property rights that we do. And in fact, you don't want to be too wealthy. Certainly if you don't have any land to call your own. So after the fall of Acre, people were looking for a scapegoat. And the King of France settled on the Templars. He blamed the Templars for the loss of the Holy Land. And he also wanted to get his hands on their money. And so in 1312, he ordered a number of leading Templars arrested. He basically tortured confessions out of them that they had gone off the deep end. They'd all become heretical. They all basically worshiped the devil. And on the basis of this, he had them condemned for heresy. And so you see an illustration of Jacques de Molay and another Templar being burnt at the stake in 1312. And this, the Pope, the French king prevailed upon the Pope to dissolve the order. So the Templars have not formally existed since 1312. They didn't all end up like this, but the various kings did get their hands on Templar wealth, whether that's in England or Portugal or what have you. Now, maybe you've heard of the Templars before. There are a lot of groups going around claiming to be descended from the Templars. The idea being that the French king didn't get them all, so they went underground and became a really elaborate secret society. Some people claim that they re-emerged in the 18th century as the Freemasons. And there's a book by the same people, Biagent and Lee. They wrote a book called Holy Blood and Holy Grail that was the basis of the Da Vinci Code. Here's another book that they wrote, The Temple and the Lodge. Okay, so they're talking about the medieval Knights Templar and then the modern Freemasons. And they certainly believe that there is an institutional connection between the two. And there's all sorts of other conspiracy theories. The Templars make appearances in the Da Vinci Code. My students tell me that they also appear in Assassin's Creed. Okay. But I'm afraid to say that there is no real evidence that the Templars went underground. There's no evidence that they came to the New World before Columbus. There's all kinds of conspiracy theories about the Templars. Now, as far as we can tell, they were dissolved in the early 14th century. And it's unfair and it's shocking what happened. But, it's generally, don't, how to put this, if you have a choice, join the Hospitallers, join the Knights of Malta, don't join any group claiming to be descended from the Templars. There really is institutional continuity between the Hospitallers and the Knights of Malta that simply doesn't exist with the Temple and the Lodge. Okay, so that's it for the Crusades. I'll say again, there are people who are very embarrassed about the Crusades, that Christian holy warfare is a contradiction in terms, that a lot of Muslims needlessly died. And yeah, I mean, the Pope himself, John Paul II at the time, in 1999, he went to Jerusalem and he apologized for the Crusades. I don't know. I think that went a little bit too far, but it's true. Christians are generally not proud of the Crusades. It does seem to violate a certain Christian principle. But keep in mind, I mean, it's simply an answer to jihad. Muslims have practiced jihad from the very beginning. It took Christians a while to realize maybe we need to fight back a little. But it was ultimately a failure. Certainly in the Holy Land, the Crusades were a failure. Okay? So on some level, the thing that Christians should be embarrassed about is the fact that they were a failure, not that they happened in the first place. Okay, so that ends the lecture on the Second Crusade.